"You're a beggar, Dad." My son screamed those words at me with a force I didn't recognize, like he'd been holding that anger in for years. The sound of it still hangs in the air of that kitchen every time I close my eyes. It was early morning, the kind of quiet when the sunlight is soft and nothing feels rushed, yet his voice tore through the room like a sharp crack in the walls. I stood there holding a warm cup between my palms, trying to steady my breath, wondering how a child I once carried on my shoulders could look at me with that much resentment. He didn't wait for my response. He paced with quick, irritated steps, grabbing his protein shake from the counter, tapping it against his palm like the simple act of breathing near me annoyed him. I tried to ask him about the bills, not to scold him, just to understand what was going on. But he didn't hear concern. He heard judgment. He spun around, face tight, eyes narrowed, and threw that sentence at me like it was the only truth he'd ever known. "You're a beggar, Dad. Living here because I let you." For a moment, I just stared at him. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted to choose my silence wisely. Sometimes silence is the last bit of dignity a father is left. I felt the sting settle deep in my chest. Not loud or fiery, just slow and heavy. The kind of hurt that doesn't flare up, but sinks in. When he stormed out, the door slammed so hard the house shook. Picture frames rattled. One of my old clocks tipped slightly forward on its hook. The quiet that followed was colder than the insult. I sat down at the small dining table and folded my hands, the way I used to before big decisions in my business days. Funny how even after retirement, even after stepping back from the world I built, those instincts stayed with me. Michael never cared to know how much of that world existed. He never asked. Never wondered about the years before he came along. When I fought through long nights, bad deals, failing partners, and rising markets to build something solid, he thought I was just an aging father who needed a roof. He didn't know about the companies, the investments, the patience I poured into every venture. He didn't know the number, $70 million, sitting quietly in places I never talked about. He never knew that the man he called a beggar could have bought this entire street without blinking. But I never held it against him that he didn't know. What hurt was that he didn't care. I took a walk after he left. The air outside was cool, moving through the trees in a slow whisper. I walked past houses where kids played in driveways and neighbors waved from their porches. I remembered when Michael was small, how he would run ahead of me and then stop, turn around, and wait with both arms stretched out. "Dad, hurry," he'd say, smiling so wide his cheeks pushed up under his eyes. There was a time he loved being around me. A time he trusted me completely. Somewhere along the way, life pulled us apart. Subtle at first, then all at once. He got older, angrier, more focused on looking successful than being steady. He wanted shortcuts. He wanted validation. And he wanted to believe that I had nothing so he could feel like he had everything. When I returned to the house, the rooms felt unfamiliar. His words echoed through every corner. I knew something had shifted between us, something I couldn't ignore. I sat in the living room, looking at the framed photos from years ago, birthdays, holidays, little moments that once felt permanent. I tried to understand how a son could forget so much love. I knew then that I couldn't stay in that house much longer. Not after what he said. Not after seeing how he truly saw me. But walking away wasn't the hard part. The hard part was knowing that sometimes a son needs to face the truth, the way life delivers its strongest lessons, quietly, unexpectedly, and without warning. And in 3 days. Life would show him something he never saw coming. The moment my Tesla pulled into the driveway and left him speechless, I spent the next morning in quiet thought, letting the weight of Michael's words settle in their own corner of my memory. I didn't rush to judge him. I didn't rush to react. At my age, reacting too quickly is just another way of running from the truth. And I've lived long enough to know that every harsh moment deserves a little space to breathe before you decide what to do with it. I made myself a simple breakfast, sat by the window, and watched the neighborhood wake up. Cars rolled out of driveways. Dogs barked. The world kept moving, even though something inside me felt stuck. Michael didn't come downstairs. I heard him moving around above me. Heavy steps across the floorboards, drawers opening and closing. When he finally left for work, he didn't say a word. The door clicked shut, and the silence returned like an old companion pulling up a chair next to me. I looked at the small suitcase I'd placed beside the couch the night before. Just 2 changes of clothes and the documents I needed. I wasn't planning to run away. I was planning to give him space to feel the consequences of pushing away someone who had only ever stood by him. I called my attorney, a man who'd been with me through every rise and fall, and told him I'd be coming down to the firm. He didn't ask questions. He knew my voice well enough to hear the conflict beneath it, and he simply said he'd prepare the papers I requested. I took a rideshare into the city, keeping my head tilted toward the window the whole drive, watching the familiar buildings appear one by one. The world outside hadn't changed, but my place in my son's world certainly had. At the office, I sat across from my attorney as he slid a folder toward me. Inside were the ownership documents for my properties, my investment portfolios, and several business holdings, all still quietly under my name, untouched. I'd built everything with intention, structure, and a long view of life. And now it was time to adjust that long view. I signed the papers that would give me immediate access to liquid funds and close out a private account I hadn't touched in years. Not to punish my son, but to remind myself that I still had control over my own life. When I left the building, the sun had climbed higher, casting sharp light across the sidewalk. I found myself walking slower than usual, not because of age, but because each step carried the weight of a realization I'd been resisting. Michael didn't just disrespect me. He misunderstood everything I ever tried to teach him. He thought I lived with him out of need. He thought I depended on him. He thought he had grown above me in status or worth. And I had allowed that misunderstanding to grow by keeping my life quiet, by living simply, by never bragging about what I owned or what I accomplished. I checked into a small boutique hotel downtown. Nothing extravagant, just peaceful and discreet. I spent the afternoon on the balcony, listening to the muffled traffic below and letting the cool breeze settle my thoughts. I could have stayed in one of my own properties, but I wanted distance. Distance to think. Distance to let Michael face the reality of an empty house without assuming I'd come running back the moment he yelled loud enough. That evening, I received a text from him. Just one line, "When are you coming back?" There was no apology, no softness, just expectation. I stared at the screen for a long moment. I didn't reply. Not because I wanted to punish him, but because some lessons require silence more than answers. The next day passed quietly. I walked through the park, watched children chase each other through fallen leaves, listened to the laughter of strangers. Life looked different when you stepped outside of a space where you felt unwanted. It felt lighter, as if the air itself carried more patience. I found myself thinking back to the early years, how hard I'd worked not just for money, but to build a life my son could step into with confidence. I never wanted to burden him with the responsibility of knowing how much I had. I wanted him to learn humility, independence, strength. I wanted him to understand that respect comes from character, not wealth, but somewhere along the way, I'd mistaken silence for teaching. And silence alone is not enough. On the third morning, I checked out of the hotel. I walked out carrying nothing but the suitcase, my jacket folded over my arm. A brand new Tesla waited for me at the curb, ordered 2 days earlier, delivered exactly when promised. Sleek, polished, quiet, glowing faintly in the early sunlight. I ran my hand along the side of it, not out of pride, but out of acceptance. Not everything needed to be modest. Not everything needed to be hidden. I sat in the driver's seat and took a slow breath as the screens lit up around me. The car hummed alive with a softness that reminded me of a whisper. The moment had come, not for revenge, not for spectacle, but for clarity. I drove back to the house with calm hands on the wheel. With each mile, I thought about the son waiting inside. Whether he was worried, angry, confused, I didn't know. But I knew he wasn't expecting to see his father return behind the wheel of a $70,000 car. Much less one piece of a fortune he still believed didn't exist. When I turned onto our street, neighbors paused on their lawns. Some waved. Some just stared at the quiet shimmer of the Tesla rolling past. I pulled into the driveway slowly, deliberately. The door to the house swung open. Michael stepped outside. And for the first time in a long while, he had no words at all. Michael stood frozen in the doorway, one hand gripping the frame as if he needed something solid to keep himself upright. The morning light caught the side of his face, and for a brief moment I saw the boy he used to be, wide-eyed, hopeful, always waiting for me to come home so he could tell me about his day. But the man staring at the Tesla now wasn't that boy. He was someone caught between shock and disbelief, trying to make sense of a reality he never imagined. I opened the door of the car slowly, stepping out with steady movements. I didn't want to turn this moment into a performance. I didn't want to gloat or revel in the surprise. I simply wanted him to see the truth he refused to believe. I was never dependent on him. I walked toward him, hearing only the soft clicking of the cooling engine behind me. He didn't say a word. Not yet. His breath hitched slightly, his eyes darting from the car to me and back again, as if he were searching for some hidden explanation buried in the metal. "Dad, where did you get that?" he finally asked, voice strained and low. I didn't answer right away. I stepped past him into the house, setting my keys gently on the table near the door. I could feel him behind me, hovering, confused, restless. His presence filled the room with a nervous energy I hadn't felt from him since he was a teenager, trying to explain a broken window. But this wasn't a boy's mistake. This was a man struggling to understand how deeply he had misjudged someone who loved him more than he ever realized. I walked into the living room and sat down slowly, letting the quiet settle between us. He remained standing, arms crossed, shoulders tight, eyes flicking between me and the open front door where the Tesla still glimmered in the sunlight. "Dad," he repeated, louder this time. "Where did you get the money for that? What is going on?" There was a time I would have explained everything immediately, eager to calm him, eager to reassure him. But I wasn't interested in soothing the discomfort created by his own assumptions. I wanted him to sit with it, to feel it, to understand that his judgment had carved a distance between us, and only truth could bridge it. "I needed space," I said finally. "That's why I left." He blinked, taken aback by the simplicity of it. I could see he expected a lecture, maybe a dramatic revelation. But sometimes the quiet truth stings sharper than any loud accusation. He lowered his arms, rubbing his forehead with one hand. "Why the Tesla?" he asked softly. "You couldn't afford something like that. You said," he caught himself, biting off the end of the sentence. "You said you were broke. You said you needed my help. You said you had nothing left." I let those unspoken words linger between us. "I never said I was broke," I reminded him gently. "You assumed I was." He swallowed hard. That realization landed heavily on him. He paced across the room, running both hands through his hair, his breath picking up. "Dad, I don't understand. Why didn't you tell me?" His voice cracked slightly, revealing confusion wrapped in embarrassment. I watched him carefully. Not with anger, not with superiority, just with the slow, steady patience of a father who knows his child is about to confront his own reflection in a very uncomfortable mirror. "Because I didn't want money to be the thing holding us together," I said quietly. "I wanted respect. I wanted a relationship built on character, not wealth. I wanted you to see me as your father, not a wallet." He froze in place. His eyes softened, but only for a moment before guilt washed over them like a storm cloud. He sat down across from me, elbows on his knees, hands clasped tightly. "So, all this time, you were letting me think." His voice trailed off, and silence filled the room again. He didn't need to finish the sentence. We both understood what he meant. I didn't nod. I didn't correct him. Some truths hurt more when spoken aloud. And I didn't want to crush him with the weight of his own words. After a long pause, he finally whispered, "I'm sorry." 2 simple words, fragile, quiet, unsteady. But they were not enough, not yet. Not because I needed revenge. Not because I wanted him to suffer. But because apologies without understanding are only temporary patches on deeper wounds. I leaned back, resting my hands on the armrests. "Sorry for what?" I asked. My tone stayed calm, steady, almost gentle, but I could see the question hit him hard. He exhaled shakily, his gaze dropping to the floor. "For how I spoke to you. For acting like you were a burden. For forgetting everything you did for me." His voice grew quieter with each confession, as though each admission peeled away another layer of pride. I let him speak, not interrupting, not rushing. "Dad, I thought you needed me. I thought you couldn't take care of yourself." He swallowed, eyes shimmering with the beginning of regret. "I thought you were old, weak, and I let myself get angry about things I never should have been angry about." That last sentence hung in the air with a fragile honesty I hadn't heard from him in years. I didn't respond right away. I let the moment breathe, let the weight of everything he'd said settle in the room. Because this wasn't about me revealing my wealth. It was about him understanding the value of humility, respect, and empathy, lessons I hoped he had learned long ago, but which life had clearly waited to teach him now. "Michael," I said quietly, "it was never about needing you. It was about loving you." He inhaled sharply, and I watched the realization sink into him like a slow, deep tide. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't have imagined, was that the Tesla was only the beginning of the truth he was about to face, because before the sun would set that evening, he would discover who I truly was, and what he almost threw away. I stayed seated while Michael slowly lifted his head, his expression caught somewhere between fear and revelation. He was finally listening, not to defend himself, not to justify anything, but to understand. For the first time in years, I saw the man he could still become, not the one he had been acting like. I took a gentle breath and let the final truth come out, steady and clear. "There's something you need to know," I said. "Something I kept from you because I wanted you to grow your own way. Not in my shadow. Not under my money. I wanted you to learn life with your own strength." His eyes tightened, but not with anger, with anticipation, almost dread. "Dad, what do you mean?" I reached for the small envelope I'd brought from the hotel. I placed it on the table between us. It wasn't thick. It wasn't flashy. Just a plain envelope with a quiet weight inside it. The kind of weight that changes the direction of people's lives. He stared at it, then slowly opened the flap. He pulled out the papers with careful fingers, his eyes scanning the first page before freezing in place. I watched the moment hit him, the exact second he realized what he was holding. The investment documents, the business ownership summaries, the account valuations, all of it. The truth he had never bothered to imagine. He swallowed hard as his voice cracked. This is all you? All this time?" He looked up at me, eyes wide, as if seeing me for the first time in years. "Dad, your worth. That number doesn't matter," I said quietly. "What matters is how easily you believed I was worth nothing." His breath trembled. He looked away, ashamed, gripping the papers like they were heavier than steel. I let him sit with that. A father's hardest task is letting his child feel the truth without stepping in to soften the landing. I waited, letting the silence fill the room around us. After a long stretch, he whispered, "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to," I answered gently. "But you do have to change what you do next." He nodded slowly, his hands unsteady. For the first time, he didn't look at me as someone occupying space in his house. He looked at me like a father who had given him more than he ever understood. I stood up to leave. Not out of anger, not out of punishment, but because the moment needed space to breathe. I reached for my keys on the table, a soft jingle that seemed to echo louder than his shouting from days ago. "Dad," he said quickly, rising to his feet, his voice tight with panic. "Where are you going?" "For a drive," I said. "And for you." A little time to think. He took a shaky step toward me. "Are you coming back?" I looked at him, really looked at him, the boy I raised, the man he became, and the person he was still trying to find within himself. I softened my voice. "That depends on you, Michael." He froze, his breath catching. I could see a storm of regret building inside him, but also something else, humility. Something he hadn't shown in years. I stepped past him, opened the front door, and let the cool air brush against my face. My steps were slow, steady, calm. As I reached the Tesla, I heard him call behind me, not with anger, not with pride, but with a tremor that told me something inside him had shifted. "Dad, I'm going to do better." I didn't turn around right away. I let those words sink into the quiet morning. Then I looked over my shoulder, giving him a small nod. "I hope so, son." I got into the car, the interior lighting up softly around me. As I backed out of the driveway, I saw him standing there, shoulders low, hands at his sides, no anger left in him. Just a man finally realizing the true value of the father he almost lost to his own arrogance. And as I drove away, I felt something easing inside me, not revenge, not triumph, but a simple, quiet clarity. Sometimes it isn't wealth that teaches a lesson. Sometimes it's the moment a son realizes who his father truly is. And in that silence, I found my answer. Forgiveness is earned, not given away.